Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Social Housing Roundtable. Lovely to have you all with us already this morning on this brisk but bright Tuesday morning. A massive welcome to everybody, particularly if you're particularly if you're new. We're still getting new people joining up every week, which is absolutely lovely to see. But we're also doing a bit of a strategy at the moment and looking through our courses and what we've done over the course of the year. And a huge thank you to those who've been to so many sessions over the course of the year. It's been fantastic, and we're really grateful to you. My name's Matt Baird. This is the Social Housing Roundtable. So I've been running this now for really the last 5 years, but heavily kind of over the last 3 years. This is episode 206, I believe, 206, 207, something in that ballpark. Becky Tucker is back with us today for, I think, her third session. I'll introduce Becky in just a minute. But this community is all about creating conversations that matter. And we're here to agree, disagree, debate, discuss, get out of our silos and really kind of engage and understand kind of all sides of the coin and understand what's going on in the social housing world. So feel free to debate or put forward a respectful disagreement of thought if you wish to. But equally, if you do kind of follow what's going on today and you can see exactly the understanding, please share it and talk to people about it and explain to friends and colleagues exactly what we're doing here and what we're trying to grow. Day to day, I work in recruitment. That's what I've done for the last 15 years. It is that which keeps this running for free. So if you are looking for recruitment support, please reach out. But also thank you to our sponsors. We've got some amazing sponsors this year. And today, through 2025, we are sponsored by both Alertical and CMSG. So a huge thank you to those for keeping this platform running and to keep it free for all of you. So to today, like I say, this is Becky's third session on the Social Housing Roundtable. Usually, it's our very first session of the year, and we kick off every beginning of every year with the risk report, with the sector risk report, and what we're discussing. And unfortunately, our speaker that was due to be with us this week withdrew quite late, quite last minute. And so we started going, well, who might be free? Who might be free? And we're very grateful that Becky was like, yeah, I can make it work. Don't worry, it's cool. I know what we're doing with the roundtable. This is brilliant. So a massive welcome back to Becky Tucker from House of Risk. I'm going to pass across to Becky, who's going to talk about the sector risk report, talk about some of the findings, some of the views, some of the overarching themes, and then we'll open it up into a more kind of broad and open discussion. So if there are thoughts, ideas you want to share while Becky's speaking, please put them in the chat. Outside of that, like I say, we will move into a more roundtable discussion afterwards. So without further ado, Becky, a huge welcome back. Thank you for joining in and for joining in last minute and for stepping back onto the platform today. It's lovely to have you back with us.
Thank you so much, Matt. And it's great to be here. And it's lovely to see some new faces and some familiar ones. So great. And thanks for joining us. As Matt says, this is my third year of doing, I hadn't counted that actually, Matt. It's my third year apparently of doing sector risk profile. So it's my, for those of you that know me, probably my most exciting thing that I do in the year. And that is as soon as the sector risk profile lands on my mat or in my inbox, as today we might say, I then take it, I analyse it, I use the experience that we gain through our clients at House of Risk, and I interpret it. So what we do, instead of just regurgitating what's in it, what we instead do is take the content and hopefully share that with you in a meaningful way with some key takeaways as well, which is really important, I think, for these sessions, that, you know, you're not just coming along to listen, but you're actually coming along to listen, learn, and take away. So I'm going to share my screen. I've got some slides to work through, so bear with me for just one moment. Okay. Right, hopefully you can see my slides okay.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Becky.
Perfect. Okay, right. So I guess probably worth saying in terms of introduction, because not everybody might necessarily have come to one of these before. So good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us for this year's sector risk profile session. So for those of you that haven't attended any of these before, as I say, my name is Becky Tucker and I'm director and founder of House of Risk. We are a risk management consultancy, and I am very famously well known for saying, but not the usual consultant. I worked in the sector for many years before setting up my own business, doing the job. So really understanding management of risk, the challenges of working with boards. I'm a board member myself. I sit on an audit and assurance committee. So very much involved in the sector from a practitioner perspective still, which I think is really, really important. And as I say, we're going to make this a meaningful, practical session. What I don't want to do is just talk to you about the sector risk profile, but I want you to be able to take away some things that you can use in your day-to-day practice. So not a narrative summary of risks, but in effect, a kind of strategic signal from the regulator. So what we see is what they believe the challenges will be for the sector over the next 12 months. And so just as importantly, the standards of governance and assurance, and that they expect organisations to demonstrate in response to that. So it's 2025 profile, and normally I'm doing this in 2026 after the profiles happened, but this year is a particularly significant one. I probably say that every year. It reinforces themes that we've been building over the past few years, very much around safety, data, financial resilience. Nothing shocking. It does shift an emphasis on some things in important ways, though, and we will cover that as we go through. The regulator is much clearer this year about why governance is the constant thread running through the sector failures and what good governance genuinely looks like in practice. So as usual, my aim in this session is not to simply repeat it. You'll already have the report. You already will have read it, I'm sure. And if you haven't, it makes a good read every year. It's an important document. We're going to draw out the underlying messages the regulator is signalling to us. And if there's one thing that the SRP, as we'll refer to it as, makes crystal clear this year, it is that margin for error has diminished again significantly. And I think they probably say that each year. We're pushing the envelope even further this side. Providers are being asked to make very difficult decisions with less headroom, more complex safety and quality requirements, and rising expectations about tenancy, transparency, tenant voice, and data integrity. None of the things we're going to argue with in this session. Absolutely not. This combination means that boards will increasingly be judged not only on the decisions they make, but on the quality of the information they've made it upon, that robustness of controls in place, and the confidence of the data that underpins those decisions. So I guess I'm going to grab my coffee, and I hope you do too. We're going to crack into the session today. Okay, so... Lovely. Right, so to set the scene for today, it's important that we understand why the SRP carries so much weight. The regulator has been increasingly clear, not only through the SRP, but through inspections, through regulatory judgments and casework, that the sector is operating in a fundamentally different environment to even the 3 years ago since I started doing these. The combination of higher operating costs, building safety requirements, aging asset base, and persistently constrained financial capacity means that organisations are really considerably less room for making mistakes. The SRP is explicit, governance is quality, and that's what determines whether organisations are able to navigate that complexity successfully, I guess. So the expectations on boards, on executive teams are noticeably higher. I see that myself as a board member. The SRP emphasises that uncertainty is not an excuse for inaction, I quote. In fact, it states very clearly that inertia in the face of uncertainty can carry even greater risk. That is a direct message to boards, the most confident that in your decision making that you can get, but also confident in the information, risk assessments and control environment that underpins those decisions, as I'd said. So this year's profile definitely builds on a shift in tone from the regulator, one that is building through regulatory casework, weak data, inconsistent controls, and limited transparency, are no longer viewed as operational shortcomings, but actually fundamentally around governance, about understanding where governance fails, and particularly those relating to safety, data integrity, inaccurate reporting, etc. Alongside this, we've got the financial headroom that continues to tighten. The sector has seen another fall in financial performance. down with the 7th consecutive year. Not a pretty sight. Many providers are entering a period where strategic trade-offs, particularly around safety, repairs, new supply, and financial resilience, must be made deliberately. We need to be transparent about that, and we need to be ever clearer to understand the consequences of those. So as we move into the kind of substantive themes of the document, keep in mind that this is very much a year where the regulator is expecting providers not only to know their risks, but to demonstrate that credible risk-based decision-making in a climate where margin for error is smaller than ever. So at a glance then, before we go any further, it's probably helpful to take a look at the 5 themes that we structured in the 2025 sector risk profile. The regulator hasn't just listed risks, it's grouped sector profiles pressures into themes. And that shows where the challenges are concentrated and where governance needs to be strongest. So the first of those themes, safety and decent homes. So the SRP highlights continuing weaknesses in stock condition and stock condition data, particularly, and accuracy around safety records and the ability to track and evidence remedial works. The message is very clear. Landlords must be able to provide the real condition of their homes and not just the estimate of that. And then the second theme, new supply and development, reflects the tensions, I guess, between the expectations to deliver homes and the sector's more limited capacity. Not every provider can deliver at scale and develop that at scale, but all must understand the risks and financial implications and governance needed when they do. So assurance is the priority, not just the ambition. And then third, data controls and business management. We're going to be talking a lot about data today. Weak data remains a core cause of consumer standard failures. Fragmented systems, manual workarounds undermine the reliability of information, and that undermines governance. So the sector risk profile is explicit. Poor data is no longer an operational issue, it's a governance failure. Really interesting perspective. And then the fourth, the financial viability, highlights a sector, I guess, operating within shrinking headroom. Debt pressures, refinancing risk, rising costs mean boards have to be much clearer insight into liquidity, trade-offs, and how financial risks flow across the organisation. And then the final theme, reputation and transparency. We've seen this for a few years. This comes with a sector that struggles with reputation in many times, and particularly around large incidents that we've seen over years that I won't be digging into today. Consumer regulations, TSMs, the new stairs, landlord responsibilities must assume greater visibility of decisions and performance. Transparency is shifting from expectation to obligation. So although the SRP is framed around these kind of 5 themes, governance is that kind of what I would say 6th of those. It's the golden thread running through all of them. The single biggest determinant of resilience. And we are talking about a resilient organisation that needs to be focused upon nowadays, shaping how organisations are managing their risk, their data, the financial decisions we make, tenant outcomes, and it remains the foundation, really, of every regulatory expectation. So let's just dig into some of these themes. So we start with the regulators first, the most prominent theme, safe and decent homes. This is an area where the SRP is most direct, most detailed, and frankly, least forgiving. And I can't necessarily argue with that, given the title. It's clear why. Despite progress across the sector, the regulator continues to see significant and recurring weaknesses in core safety disciplines, gas, fire, electrical, asbestos, water safety, and lift maintenance all feature there. This is kind of foundational, I suppose, non-negotiable obligations, yet the SRP shows that some landlords are still unable to reliably evidence full compliance. So the regulator's message to landlords must be single source of the truth, and boards must be able to see at a glance the real compliance position, not the position organisations hope or believe to be true. And this is a common kind of attitude through the SRP this year. This isn't about what we would like to see our organisation's performance to be, but actually how do we evidence it? Where's the proof? Providers will need to be clear about resource pathways for investigations, repairs, communications with tenants that can withstand inspection. It's not enough to be compliant. Organisations must be able to demonstrate that they are compliant consistently and reliably. And then finally, on this building safety, the regulator emphasises timely action on life-critical defects. Not simply awareness of them. Boards are expected to fully understand the cost implications of remediation, the sequencing of major works, and the risks associated with delays, including operational, financial, and tenant wellbeing impacts as well. So in short, safe and decent homes remains the sector's most significant area of regulatory risk, and also the area where the strongest governance can have the most immediate impact. So this theme is where data, repairs, compliance, assets, and finance all converge together, where boards will increasingly be judged on their strength of oversight and assurance. So in practice, if we take the SRP at face value, the message is very clear. The regulator believes that most safety-related failures are entirely avoidable. So let's move into what providers actually need to do differently, and perhaps some priorities. The first being accuracy and currency and of data. This is not new to us. It's always a challenge in the sector. A compliance dashboard is no longer sufficient if the underlying data is unreliable, manually entered or sitting across multiple systems, for example. Organisations need real-time consolidated view of every safety obligation. And then second, evidence-based compliance reporting. So boards are now being downgraded, not because landlords aren't carrying out checks, but because they can't prove they've done them. And we're moving into an environment where we believe we are compliant carries no weight. The regulator wants traceable, auditable evidence, as I'd said. And then thirdly, financial stress testing for building safety. The SRP links asset safety directly to long-term financial viability. So really, as a board, we need to see integrated scenarios, safety investment versus liquidity, remediation delays versus financial covenants, and regulatory compliance versus development capacity, for example. Fourth is workforce and contractor assurance. A notable signal in the SRP is the recognition that the sector capacity in fire safety, damp and mold specialists, building safety engineers is constrained. Good governance requires boards to ask questions. Do we have in-house capability? Do we have resilient contractor arrangements? Are we over-reliant on one supplier? And we've seen where that's ended us up in the sector in past times too. And if we have competence to verify the work they deliver, can we actually get confidence about what we've seen delivered on our behalf? And then finally, organisations need to be preparing now for the next phases of our Webb's Law, not just a repairs obligation, it's an operating model issue. Providers need clear documented workflows that cover triage and investigation of reported hazards, response timescales, evidence capture, communication with tenants. I'll say it again, communication with tenants, and escalation for complex cases. So theme 2 then. So let's just unpick theme 2. Theme 2 was the supply of new homes. We're still in the same, if not worse, a situation as we were last year in terms of the need for new homes. the regulator opens this section of the SRP with a reminder that providing homes for those in need remains a fundamental purpose of the sector. Absolutely. And this year, the government have been very explicit about the role we've seen, haven't we, through the year, that registered providers must play in delivering national housing targets. But the SRP also recognises the emerging tensions, I guess, here. Demand for new supply is rising, and the sector's capacity to deliver financially, operationally, and organisationally is under sustained pressure. So whilst demand goes up, the ability to deliver might well go down. And what's particularly interesting for me this year is that the regulator is not pushing a one-size-fits-all approach to development. They acknowledge that some landlords, especially those carrying significant remediation programs or facing liquidity constraints, will need to moderate their ambitions. Other than with stronger balance sheets and fewer competing pressures, there may be a more active role in increasing supply for others. So I guess the emphasis is not just on how many homes are delivered now, but whether boards are fully understand the risks, capacity, controls, and assurance needed for their chosen level of development activity. This is where governance needs to be sharper, absolutely understanding the sensitivity of the development programs, and understanding the fluctuating market conditions, ensuring risk appetite for market activity is not based on pre-2020 assumptions, for example. So, my note to you out there: make sure your boards are regularly setting your risk appetite, and that actually that regular setting of that appetite is used beyond just setting it in the boardroom. So the key messages for this theme: delivering new homes remains a strategic priority for the country, but actually it cannot come at the expense of our financial viability, definitely not at our asset safety and our organisational resilience. So strong governance means being clear about why you are developing, what value it creates, how much risk you can carry, and what controls you have in place to manage that risk. And this is where boards need to be expecting to be shown where they've got confidence and competence in these areas, again, directly quoted. So if the previous slide sets out the regulator's concerns, this one focuses on what providers need to do to demonstrate strong governance and risk management around new supply. The first action here: reassess development assumptions. Many appraisal models were built in a different market. Higher build costs, and slower sales and greater remediation pressures mean assumptions may no longer hold. Boards should be asking, do our appraisals reflect the current conditions, for example? And are our assumptions still credible? How sensitive are we to shocks in costs, value, and delivery? And then second, strengthen gateway controls and independent assurance. Development risk should be matched by the right skills and internal controls. This includes consistent gateway reviews at appraisal, contract, and handover stages, independent scrutiny of complex schemes, escalation triggers for costs or programme movements, and clear board visibility of risks and mitigations. So high-level summaries are not enough. Evidence matters, as our common thread throughout today. Third, the rebalance of development ambitions against investment in stock speaks for itself. Fourth, strengthening scenario and sensitivity analysis. So make sure your stress testing is absolutely robust. We need to understand how adverse movements in build costs, sales performance, supply chain disruption, or contractor failure affect our viability, for example. Development risks interact with the wider obligations such as remediation. Scenario testing must reflect that as a combined pressure and not single events. So that kind of multifaceted approach is really, really key, as we've seen in previous years. And then finally, boards need to have a stronger grasp on joint ventures and counterparty risks. We're seeing some failures again through the sector. This is not new to us, and yet we're still seeing them. So it must include clarity, absolutely, on obligations, on how delays or impairments flow through group structures. potential covenant impacts, and how quality is assured when homes are acquired rather than directly built. So theme 3 then, as we work our way through, if there's one area that the SRP's tone is especially direct this year, it's data. And for those of you at the Audit and Risk Conference and the Inside Housing Governance Conference that saw the regulator speak this year, we've heard this from them directly. They are warning for years gone by that weak data drives risk, but in the 2025 profile, this is elevated to a governance issue now. Poor data is no longer an operational flaw, it's a structural vulnerability that undermines compliance, decision-making and assurance. The SRP is absolutely clear that inaccurate, incomplete data sits behind many consumer standard failures that they've seen over the past 12 months. This issue cuts across stock conditions, safety checks, repairs, asset records, rent setting, and tenant communication. In each case, and I guess for us, those that seen the Housing Ombudsman speak recently, they will concur with that latter part as well. So in each case, boards will need to make decisions based on information they couldn't fully understand and validate or rely on it. And so a major theme is that data fragmentation, as they refer to it. Many providers still operate multiple legacy systems, spreadsheets, contractor portals, unvalidated surveys, and that creates blind spots. When those blind spots overlap with safety or compliance duties, they become governance failures. And the regulator is explicit here. Boards are no longer one step removed from the reliability of the data that they have to depend on. The SRP also stresses the need for trustworthy tenant level data. TSMs rely on accurate operational information. Upcoming STAIRS requirements will expose weaknesses in data retention, management and disclosure. Rent setting is another pressure point. CPI plus 1% and convergence rules only work in underlying rent and property data is complete and accurate. So we absolutely need to make sure of that. And then finally, reliable environmental and asset data is becoming critical for net zero, for EPC planning. Yes, it's still on the agenda and we need to be planning for this. The challenge is not only funding retrofit, but knowing where to target investment and how scenarios actually impact cost and viability. So it kind of relates back to our well-planned stress testing as well. So in practical terms then, if the SRP is clear on anything, it's that strong data is now defining feature of governance maturity. So we create a single version of the truth. So most recent consumer standard downgrades involve fragmented data sets or manual workarounds, and providers need a unified data environment or at minimum, absolutely systems that have proper validation. And then second, key risk indicators for data integrity. So with data quality now a strategic risk, organizations need KRIs that quantify confidence in data set. So for example, you might want to have things like percentage of homes with validated stock condition data, percentage of safety checks with verified evidence, repairs records with complete audit trails, or tenant records with mandatory fields completed, all of these indicating whether a risk is performing well within the organisation or is indeed degrading. And then third, preparing for the STAIRS or social tenant access to information requirements, if it rolls off the tongue, then will significantly raise expectations, don't they, around transparency, document governance, and providers will need version control, clear classification of which can be shared, structured, document retention, searchability, and a strong narrative discipline, actually. If document management is messy today, STAIRS will absolutely expose this. So keep it high on your agenda throughout 2026. And then fourth, strengthen fraud governance and controls. The SRP highlights increasing fraud risks, tenancy, procurement, cyber, and payment fraud, for example. So keep that on your list. Fraud is no longer a peripheral, it's a core governance issue. And then finally, build the data foundations for net zero and EPC compliance. As I've mentioned, boards need asset performance data that allows them to model retrofit costs, sequencing, and viability. The challenge isn't just the investment, it's knowing where to target it and where the long-term implications of inactions actually lie. So theme 4 then. That takes us to core financial resilience, and the SRP's messaging here is some of the clearest and most technical we've seen. So bear with me. The regulator states plainly that sector financial performance has now been on the decline and has been so for the past 7 consecutive years, creating real limits on what organisations can absorb or deliver. So the headline metric is the EBITDA MRI interest cover. So sector-wide, it was 91% in 24-25, and it's not expected to rise above 100% until 2027-28. So in practice, this means many providers are not generating enough surplus where core operations to cover interest costs and instead are relying on asset disposals to fill the gap. And this is what regulators calls low headroom environment. Signalling less tolerance for governance or control failings. And then, of course, we've seen debt levels at historic highs with more than £100 billion now drawn down across the sector. Much of which is fixed and long-term and growing proportion moving toward financing. Refinancing into higher rates with tighter covenant space creates a very different risk profile for the organisation and one needs to be considered. The regulator also shares a sharpened warning on reliance on fixed asset sales. Disposals used for stock rationalisation or reinvestment are one thing. Disposals needed to support day-to-day cash flow and maintain covenants are viewed as structural viability concerns and will trigger a deeper scrutiny. And then diversification risks remain relevant here too, even with activity scaled back in some organisations. Exposure to care, student housing, commercial lettings, and more sale subsidiaries is still material. Boards must understand these risks in full and demonstrate how they align to core purpose and, of course, I'm going to say it again, risk appetite. That leads us, of course, to the next slide, and that's around our practical approach. What's our financial viability messages here? The regulator now expects boards to show a deeper understanding of how financial risks interact with asset quality, development, safety obligations and resilience. So first, we're strengthening liquidity and covenant monitoring, making sure that we've got a forward-looking liquidity projection that covers the needs around repairs, remediation, development spend, etc. And then second, integrating risk, finance and treasury. Boards need a single joined up view that brings together headroom, financial KPIs, risk appetite, asset liability insights, and a majority of the major operational risks, such as remediation and contractor failure, those risks that can bubble up, as I like to describe it as. And then third, test combined shocks. And we've covered this already. The SRP is expecting scenario testing that reflects how risks interact with each other. That might be interest cost rises with delayed sales or remediation overruns across liquidity pressure, supported by credible mitigations, of course. And then fourth, review the purpose and viability of disposals. So strategic rationalisation is one thing. Disposals used to support cash flow, though, or covenant compliance are warning signs. And that boards need to be clear on the rationale, tenant impact, of course, and how dependency is being reduced. And then finally, reassess diversification. Boards need assurance that diversified activities are still going to deliver the value that they once intended, align with your core purpose, and fall in line with the board's risk appetite, of course. And actually consider responsible exit where they do not longer meet these. And that's really key, I think. Okay, so theme 5. So the final theme for us, and that is around reputational risk and transparency. And this is a kind of, the common thread that runs through all of our strategic risk registers. At a principal risk level, we'd expect reputation to feature as one of the consequences that fail across our risk registers. And this isn't just about, communication strategies. This is about trust and legitimacy and governance. The regulator is explicit that reputation is now inseparable from organisational accountability. A core message is the intensity of external scrutiny. So landlords are under constant observation from tenants, councillors, MPs, regulators, and the media. And boards must assume that their decisions, performance data, and in some cases their internal processes must be visible in a way that they perhaps haven't had to do before. The environment is more transparent, more political, and definitely less, I should say, forgiving. So the SRP also expects boards to be clearly articulating and evidence their purpose, their priorities, and trade-offs. A major emphasis is, of course, tenant voice. The regulator's position is simple. Tenants must have influence, not just be listened to, but have influence on strategic decisions. And this goes well beyond satisfaction measures. So boards need assurance on how tenant insights shape service delivery, how decisions are communicated back, and how fairness and equity are demonstrated, especially for our vulnerable groups. So weak tenant engagement is now viewed again as, yes, you guessed it, another governance issue. So transparency expectations are further increasing through TSMs and the upcoming stairs, which will expand absolutely when information tenants can access, including policy and performance increase that. So this creates perhaps, I guess, a sharper expectation around document governance, around version control, around narrative consistency, perhaps. And finally, the SRP links transparency directly to value for money. Boards must show in a clear and accessible way that resources are being directed to areas of greatest risk and benefit. And so in a year of constrained capacity, the ability to show your workings out becomes central to reputational resilience, really. Overall, the regulator's message is clear here, though. Organisations should expect a far greater transparency and scrutiny. Okay, so to close this last theme off then, we need to first be strengthening and expose the governance narrative. Boards need to be able to explain why decisions are made, especially when balancing safety, repairs, development, and financial resilience. The regulator expects clarity on these. What was prioritised? Why was it reasonable? What evidence informed it? And how risks were mitigating it? So transparent governance is now part of your assurance frameworks. And I can't stress this enough. Make sure your assurance frameworks get that golden thread right through them that enables a much, much easier way to give boards and committees and your tenants assurance, actually. And then second, ensure TSMs are accurate and dependable, of course. The SRP looks beyond headline scores to the reliability of this underlying data. So boards should absolutely be asking, can we trust our TSM data? Does tenant insight drive service improvement? Do results reflect actual experiences? So actually, we're seeing TSMs as a kind of core reputational indicator, which is a new way of looking at it and a very helpful one, I think. Third, close the tenant voice to the board, to the feedback loop, that kind of, that whole circular diagram thing. The regulator is expecting to see how tenants' views are shaping our decisions and how outcomes are communicated back. The absence of this loop is now considered, a governance weakness. And then fourth, prepare for stairs by strengthening document governance. Stairs will broaden tenants' access. And absolutely, providers need to be clear about what document structures are in place, version controls, redaction processes, and narrative consistency, as we'd mentioned. Any weaknesses will become more and more highly visible. And then finally, assume external visibility of more organisational information. So if you've got it, assume that there'll be access to it. With political scrutiny, consumer regulation, tenant access rights rising, we absolutely need to be thinking about that on the basis that any paper, any data set, any narrative may be examined externally. Reputational resilience now needs to depend on that consistency, that accuracy, transparency, the confidence in our decision making, I guess. So this shift is now absolutely central in demonstrating our good governance, and providers, who embrace that will be stronger in the eyes of tenant stakeholders and, importantly, the regulator too. So what does the next 12
Becky, just a quick one, and we're running quite out of time. We're normally trying to go to the Q&A by about 1:30. So how many slides have we got left?
We've just got 2.
Okay.
This one, so what priorities do we need to move forward? Priority 1, absolutely build that unified data and assurance environment. Priority 2, strengthen financial resilience and liquidity. And then priority 3, embed Awaab's law and new electrical safety standards. 5, demonstrate clear risk-based strategic trade-offs. Strengthen fraud controls in tougher legislation landscape, and prepare for stairs, of course. And then, finally, our view of the world absolutely is around making sure you've got that governance quality as our strongest predictor of resilience. Data maturity becoming fast the regulator's confidence test in our abilities. Tenant experience is now central to judgment. Transparency to become a strategic differentiator, and then strategic trade-offs must be explicit. So really kind of the environment is a challenge, but manageable, hopefully we'll say. Organisations that strengthen that governance, invest in that data foundations and embrace transparency will be more resilient and far better positioned for the next 12 months. So that's it from me. It is a long roundup in a very fun-packed regulator profile this year. Happy to open the floor. Got any chats? Got any questions?
Yeah, there's been quite a bit coming through, and we'll go kind of quick fire because I want to make sure everybody has the chance to speak. If anyone would like to come in, please do use the raise hand function. We'd love to hear from you. But Becky, obviously that was very, very thorough, and thank you for trying to get something that's a very, very intense document into a short amount of time. I appreciate it's not easy. One of the things that's come through, so Brian had said that, and I got a few notes jotted down too, but Brian had said earlier, would you agree that having plans on paper is only as good as how they are implemented on the ground and being able to show they're making a real difference to tenants? And I think this is sometimes some of the challenge that goes on in housing is the fact that, oh God, we need a policy, you need to have this, you need to have this, and you do it, but the cultural almost element of going, great, well, let's actually deliver that to the level we're meant to be is sometimes also a disconnect.
Absolutely. That returns to our assurance, doesn't it? Where are we getting assurance that those things on paper are effectively working within the organisation? I'm often referring to that golden thread. What does it mean to us as organisations to have that golden thread? Yes, you need the policies, the evidence that we've talked about throughout, but then you also absolutely need to be able to evidence that they work and that they're being used in practice. Absolutely.
One of the things that came up for me, when we were discussing data and everything else around it, that there's still, I feel, and this is maybe just the way I'm looking at it, there's that balance that's still very difficult for housing providers between going, great, well, we need to know almost anything and everything that's going on in order to meet the satisfaction and get all of our assurance and reassurance on what's going on with our homes. But also, we don't want to be in people's homes all the time. We don't want to kind of go into and be too invasive and be almost that kind of parental style that we've tried to move away from. So does anything kind of come through in terms of that data almost collection piece and how we try and get that right in a place where trying to be innovative, but also needing to collect more data than ever?
Agreed. And, I think that it is a challenge and there is no real answers to it. I think we do need to accept that there are tenants that just want to live their lives, that want to get on and do things. And that if we don't hear from them, it's not because they are avoiding us, but it's actually because they're just busy. We're all busy. But the other side of that, of course, is the fear that when we don't hear from them, they do need us and they don't know how to quite reach out. So it's really balancing that, isn't it, in a way that, is a challenge for all landlords, I think. I think it's about creating multiple opportunities would be the way that I would look at it. So don't just rely on, the old door knocking that we can't service anymore, but don't forget the old door knocking. So, as a board member, that's some of the things that we've been looking at is, as board members, do we actually go back to going and saying hello to our customer on a face-to-face basis and actually, having that kind of, touch point that is more effective as a result of that. So I think for me, it's about provide plenty of multiple opportunities. Don't just rely on that, the same old, same old.
And Tim has just shared the sectorist profile actually in the chat if anybody wants the link. But something come through from Rebecca. How can tenants raise serious issues that are impactful if the landlord's tenant's voice manager fails to inform the rest of the organisation on board the true levels and depths of issues? And I think this is like you, I sit on a board. I'm chair of a very small RP, and that balance between assurance, reassurance, where the knowledge is, where the data is the data right? From a board side, it can be really difficult because you only can kind of go off what you're presented. But as you mentioned through your profile today and through your assessment today, quite often that's the same for the exec team. You're only as good as the data that goes in, and if your data's off, then everybody is affected, from tenant through to the board as well. Alert Call return as one of the keynote sponsors for the Social Housing Roundtable in 2025 into 2026, and we're delighted to have them back. Alert Call help as many people as possible feel safe, connected, and informed by combining ingenious technology and award-winning human contact. As you can see from this touchscreen I've got with me, Alertical's digital engagement solution helps social landlords proactively know their customers and properties by putting a portable touchscreen in every home, offering a daily property check through the optional OK Each Day service, plus repairs reporting, tenant surveys, and much more. They also provide Beyond Warden Call, an easier, simpler, and lower cost wireless warden call solution with video door entry, dispersed telecare, and smoke alarms. Alertical work with over 60 housing providers across the UK to enhance two-way engagement between customers and their landlords. In 2022, Alertical won the Queen's Award for Enterprise and Innovation, and in 2023, Alertical won Housing Supplier of the Year. We're delighted to have them back with us throughout the course of this year, and please do go check them out on social media and LinkedIn to find out more. Thank you very much, Alertical, for sponsoring us again.
Absolutely. And I think, as a board member, if there's one thing that keeps me awake at night, it's missing something. With so any of you that are board members, we have hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents to read prior to each board. And so triangulation is absolutely critical. When you see something in that board pack that, or indeed that exec pack or paper or whatever it might be, that's telling you one thing, check and balance it with other things. Is that really the reality? Does our complaints back up what we're saying in terms of what we're seeing elsewhere? Is, everything on track? Does it look and feel right? And it sometimes is that gut feel, isn't it? How do you feel about it? And what is it that the evidence is telling you? And don't look at the single source. So, dig around. I'm not afraid to, and I don't think that you should be either.
Becky, I'll bring you in.
Hi. My issue was permeating past the formal complaint stage with the customer voice manager who treated me as customer mute. It was a very, very serious issue. Basically, my home was covered in sewage and mold after an 11-day flood, which contained the waste of up to 55 neighbouring homes. Now, it wasn't a little leak or anything like that. It was ankle deep sewage that had not been removed. I placed my formal complaint and I had a slight acknowledgement from the CEO. So the CEO was aware at that level. But obviously, with it being the customer voice manager's job to have processed that formal complaint, it was not processed. I didn't get a response until the February the next year, which left me street homeless. Now, within that time, the customer voice manager had received so many documents, expert reports, proving my home was uninhabitable. And it was down to the customer voice manager to have processed that formal complaint and actually investigated. So where do you go from there when the CEO and the customer voice manager does not process a formal complaint of such a serious nature?
Wow. I'm really sorry to hear your personal situation. That's incredible. Yeah, and there is no easy answer to this. This is about, I guess, making as much noise as you possibly can in order to get your message to the right people. And if you're not satisfied, then taking that further beyond the roots. And yeah, Becky, I'm really sorry that.
Ted's just mentioned in the chat there. It's at times like this. Sometimes your only option is the ombudsman, and this is where I think so much of the challenge comes through, isn't it? Is the fact that actually we speak to tenants and we say, look, do this, and then the ombudsman is there. But it's sometimes that kind of difficulty. Becky, your hand's back up.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've exhausted the housing ombudsman's complaints procedure, shall we say. The investigation was completely flawed, and this has been confessed to by the ombudsman. However, they refused to reopen. Now, within the space of 2.5, 3 years, the evidence that I presented to the Ombudsman was in concise report format, including records from my landlord's own records, repair records, historic sewage ingress, and basically they've refused their duty to refer to the regulator. So I have, like Becky said, I have beaten and banged the drum in my head against the brick wall in every single, I've gone about it in every single way that we're supposed to. So if the ombudsman fails their duties to refer these issues to the regulator, I mean, I received three letters from the Ministry of Housing, Local Government, from the regulator, and from the ombudsman, all within a week, all saying, we're not going to investigate. Where do you go? I've written to Matthew Pennycook, I wrote to Angela Rayner. I'm squoze dry of any other option.
Well, I'm more than happy to kind of take this up afterwards. I think we should reach out and have a conversation. I think it's worth, anything we can do to make noise to help you out is absolutely there. I'm aware, it's a difficult one because we want to kind of focus on the sector risk side of things as well, but I'm aware you've got a massive, massive problem there. But I think this is exactly why the sector risk report is there, Becky, isn't it? To kind of say to people, well, actually, Becky Tucker, I realise it's Becky, to kind of highlight that actually, as much as we can say we're doing well in this or struggling this, whatever it might be, actually there are too often we get to the stage of we as housing providers we get so focused on trying to get the big picture right and present right and everything else, and it's that old stat that we've talked about before of going, well, we're 97% compliant, and I'm like you on the board, great, but what about that 3%? What's going on in there? Because that's the challenge for housing providers. But anybody in any sector trying to be 100% perfect inevitably can't be, can it, Becky? Case Management Solution Group, or CMSG, are the home of React, the UK's #1 case management system for ASB and community safety. We are delighted to have them as one of our key sponsors for Social Housing Roundtable 2025 into 2026. And with the ASB app now fully integrated to the platform, it allows residents to record, monitor and report issues directly to their case office in live time. What's not to love? CMSG are bringing simplicity back to case management, and I cannot recommend them enough and thank them for all of their support through this period and through the rest of the year. Thank you, CMSG, and do please go check them out on social media and on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Absolutely not. And, it's complex. The environment that we work in is complex. I think what's not good enough is where you can't evidence that you've asked the questions. You're quite right, Matt. It's the 3%. we need to worry about what we don't know. It's the gap, as I always say. I don't mind if something's red and we're working towards making it better because I know about it and we can look and feel on it. And if it's green, hurrah, we can celebrate the moment. But it's the bit in between that, is the bit that we need to keep our attention on. Let's focus on that middle tier that says, we don't know what we don't know. Keep asking the questions, and keep
that's why
being.
Ted's mentioned in the chat there it's a health issue too, and it absolutely is. And Becky said she'll be at the Healthy Homes Hub, and this whole, we could talk again for a while on this whole other piece around new home supply and everything else, and the demand on us to develop new homes, but also demand on us to massively level up the homes we've got with finite resources, both financially and staffing and everything else that goes with it. It's a difficult balance. Couple of things that have come in on the chat, 'cause I'm trying to get as many of these done as we can in the last few minutes. So David has said housing associations are faced with a dilemma due to the financial situation of the sector. They're aware that there is technology available to improve efficiency, data collection, compliance, and provide long-term cost savings. They cannot afford the capital outlay to implement this due to budget restrictions. And I think there's going to be more and more demand on maybe shifting what a housing association is. I'm surprised that almost isn't in the report a little bit more, which is almost for me, one of the risks of housing is that it's having to become more than a housing provider. And it's interesting that, again, that is like we're having to pick up the slack for health and for social services and for all of the other areas. And the risk that has on housing providers then getting away from the core of going, well, actually, all you really are is a landlord. Just got to provide them a safe and warm to live. But that itself is a risk of trying to kind of expand more broadly, or at least I feel it is. I don't know how you think.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's something for me around reading between the lines, though, of the sector risk profile. And that actually, if you start to join the dots, that's exactly what they're saying. That actually, you need to challenge what you're there for, and that, development is not the shining light that it once was. And that, we will all argue and say, but the housing waiting list is important, absolutely. But it's inconsequential if you don't survive as an organization, because you're going to fail in many other ways for those waiting list people. So I think for me it's around reading underneath what the regulator's saying to answer that.
And this is sometimes it, isn't it? I think then it absolutely needs to be that, but sometimes housing is so focused on, right, what is it we have to do? What are the big lights? Because that's that we sometimes miss those lines between. But it's a difficult balance between the two, and I completely agree with you. Rebecca, David put something in the chat there for you to reach out and talk about some support there. So Rebecca Blunden, I hope that helps with you a little bit there. David said that the budgetary excuses can be exactly that, an excuse. A lot of money is wasted. They need to understand how to run a business, which is ultimately what it is, and dispose of any repairs contractor team who do not provide 110% excellent service. That's a whole nother kind of side of things. A few years ago, I'd have completely agreed with you. Having sat on boards, it sometimes can be more difficult than that, because it isn't just repairs that is a part of it. And there's so much going on trying to balance everything, never mind even salaries and keeping staff and retention, everything else that goes on with it, to keep that consistency. That there's a lot that goes in. Was there anything regarding recruitment, retention of staff, and the concerns about losing people from the sector, Becky, within the report, do you think even subtly?
Yes, I do. I think there was reference to skills, to shortages, but actually I think the regulator's done that. I think in previous years, we've really focused our attention in on those things, and perhaps they're seeing, good outcomes as a result of that. I don't know. The emphasis was much, much less, definitely. And just to your point, Matt, around the difference between that kind of balance that boards have to make. I think the difficult decisions around the board table, as the regulator refers to, is never been more so than now. So decisions are made, and they need to be made in the round, considering all of the aspects that we've talked about today.
I completely agree. Were there any final points you'd like to raise, Becky? Anything, what's the ways for people to catch up if they want to follow up, or any points that you would just like to leave the sector with as a final thought before we wrap up today?
Yeah, definitely. So I guess have a great Christmas, everyone. That's the important thing high on the list. But also, I think there's something around, making sure that you can, reach out to providers like me when you need some help and support around risk management. It is not an easy topic, and it's not an easy topic to make exciting and interesting, but nonetheless, it's critical today, and the sector risk profile is really calling that out. So thank you, everyone. Great to be back again, and I hopefully be back again next year.
I have absolutely no doubt about that. Thank you very, very much, Becky. We are back next week with a bit of a, I guess, similar theme-ish. So Ben Hunt from CMSG, who's one of our sponsors this year, is going to be talking about the truth behind the data of antisocial behaviour, and actually what the data is saying, and maybe actually what the real life practice is saying, and maybe the disconnect between the two. So looking forward to that. But for now, Becky, a huge thank you for coming on today. A huge thank you for sharing your insight and for trying to break down a report that, as you say, everyone should be reading. This is one of the most essential pieces to be looking at every year. So thank you for bringing it to us today. And I certainly wish you a lovely kind of, I'm not using the C word yet, but a lovely winter break as and when it comes. I'll wait till December, but I did notice the potential tree in the, oh no, it's not a tree, it's a plant in the background. I thought maybe you had a tree up already. Thank you, Becky. Cheers for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Hope you found it useful, and we'll speak to you all soon. Take care.
Take care, all.